speaking of your journey, you have given first, quote, first, a whole new meaning. The basic definition of being coming before all others in time and order.
Yeah.
But you have defined first on a whole nother level. I have this question for you because you've been first in many of the roles and organizations that you have gone into. You have opened the door. You have created the order. Question, what is required to be first?
Build $1,000,000 legacy with purpose.
Hello, YouTubers, Facebook community. I am back here and welcome to another episode of Build $1,000,000 Legacy with Purpose. I am so proud. And y'all find out as we go through this conversation, I am so proud and honored to have our today's guest on our show. Her name is Dr. Jacqueline Chisholm. I might slip and call her Jackie because y'all know what, we go way back. I'm telling you, we were just in the pre-conference room. We were talking about catching up on how we met and where we started and how, not exactly how far we've come. We're gonna have that conversation a little bit as we get into our communication together today. But I want to present to some, and introduce to others, Dr. Jacqueline Chisholm. But let me tell you a little bit about her before she say, hey. Dr. Chisholm is a mother, a wife. She is a premier leader. She is a premier speaker. She is a premier coach and consulting. Hey, y'all, she is the CEO and president of Step Forward, which is the largest community action agency in Ohio, which has monetary resources of over $47 million. I'm so proud of her. And her organization is truly transformational because they are transforming lives through education, personal and professional development. She is a premier author. She has a book out. Is that correct? She has a book out called Leadership Lessons, Notes from and for the Journey. Hey, y'all see that digital asset she holding up? I am so proud of her. So I could give you so much more of who she is. She is so premier in so many areas of her life, but I want to introduce you to Dr. Jacqueline Chisholm. Say hey.
Hey, Dr. Marnita, thank you so much for the opportunity to have this conversation.
Thank
We haven't seen each other in over probably 20 years, but I've been able to track what you've been doing. You've been tracking what I've been doing, and I'm just so proud just to have been at the beginning with you when you received your doctorate. And your readers may not know, or your listeners may not know, that you were the first African-American female to receive a PhD from Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio in chemistry. And so with that, let's have a conversation.
Let's have a conversation because even like when I was sharing with you earlier, when I think about those years, you can't do this stuff by yourself.
No.
And so when I was at Case Western Reserve, when we're talking about purpose here, it was my intention. Purpose is all about the intention and the reason for creating a thing.
Yeah.
And I was accepted into Case as a chemistry major, which is far beyond what I had even thought as a high schooler that I would be thrusted into at that time. But I was able to complete that process and that journey because you were in a room that I happened to have access to.
Mhm.
And I think that's so important. So when you talk, let's do this. Let's take it back to,
Okay.
because this is about you.
Okay.
When I met you, I think it was in Baker's building.
Yeah.
And you were in that room for a reason. You have had such an impact. Can you take us back to when you became aware that you had value, purposeful value to add to a community that would make a difference?
Okay. So let's start with kind of from whence I've come. And then I'll bring you back to the question that you're asking. I'm the middle child of three girls. In my family, middle children, we often don't know where we fit. And my mother one day introduced my sister, my older sister, this is my oldest, my younger sister, this is my youngest. And then when she got to me, she said, "This is the smart one." It was in that moment that I realized that was my role in my family. And so I tried to live up to that throughout my life. My mother and father divorced when I was 7 because of domestic violence. So in my head, I kind of assumed that that was normal. So I replicated that from the age of 15 to 19. I was in an abusive relationship. So by the time I made it to college, and the only reason I made it to college was because I had a dream. And my dream was at that time to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. I lived to go to college. Everywhere I looked around me, people were trying to do things other than trying to go to college. Girls were, too busy focused on some boy and trying to get pregnant and all that other stuff. And all I kept saying was, I looked around and said, I'm not going to get stuck here.
Mhm.
I'm going to college. I didn't know when or where. And my boyfriend at the time, the one who was abusing me, told me, he said, why don't you wait a year? And then I said that if I knew if I waited a year, I'd never go. He would have had me. Okay. So my dream was the thing that kept me moving forward. So by the time I made it to Case, he and I broke up in my freshman year. And I had to get to the point where I was willing to die to get out of that because, abusers often threaten you, saying, if I can't have you, nobody else will. And so I was willing to die rather than continue in that role of being victimized by him. But I also had to go into counseling to figure out a lot of the stuff. So I made it a case. Took me 8 years to get my undergraduate degree. Why? Because life kept happening. And then decisions that I kept making that kind of prevented me from moving forward. One of which was I married very young. I was 20, 21 when I married, and my husband, I met him on campus, black man with green eyes with a large afro. This was in the 70s. I had never met one of those before. And so I went fishing. You'd have thought I had a pole to fish. So, and I caught him, right? And within 6 to 8 months of catching him and us getting married, I was suicidal. I found out that I was pregnant at the same time I was losing the baby. So I literally went through all of this stuff. So by the time I made it to Case, in the role that you and I, when we met, I'd had all of this lived experience. And the thing that kept me going was the dream that I had when I was younger. I didn't know where I was going to go. I didn't know how I was going to get there, wherever it was, but I knew that there was better than what I'd come from. I knew that. And I knew if I worked hard to get there, that eventually, and I need to bring God into this conversation because I can't tell my
How
story
can you leave
without,
them out?
yeah, I can't tell my story without talking about the faith that I have in God. I was protected. Even within those really bad things, I was very much protected. And by the time I made it to Case, and we talked about this before we went live, there was a woman in Minnesota who had been my career counselor. I didn't even know if she remembered my name or she thought about me. But this position in Case came up and she got in touch with me and told me that I think you'd be good at this. And I applied, didn't get the job initially. A few, weeks or so later, they sent me a letter. And they offered me a position for minority recruitment, undergraduate recruitment. Now, I don't know anybody who does this job well, who doesn't think of those students as their children. Everybody that I worked with, at least people in minority recruitment, we take that very personally because I think we saw ourselves in each one of you. Then later on, we had some success with recruitment. We didn't have success with retention. And so I mentioned to you that I was in the bathroom and the dean at the time, her name is Margaret Bolding, God rest her soul. Margaret talked to me about a position that she wanted to create. They had just received a grant from the Cleveland Foundation to create a minority retention program, and she wanted me to run that program. I said, okay. Again, because you work really hard to get the students. And so I started working in the Minority Scholars Program, and that's where you and I met. And I was saying to you that for me, that was the best job I've ever had The job that I have now is wonderful. I love the mission. We help low-income families move from poverty to self-sufficiency. That is a much bigger job and a much bigger impact. And that's wonderful. Don't get me wrong. I love that. And I'm going to come back to that later on. But working with students, recruiting them to the college, holding their hand, helping them understand what college meant, because the students that we were recruiting were primarily first generation, like me,
Yeah.
didn't know how to do college. They didn't have anybody in their family to say, oh, this is what you need to do. This is how you drop in. This is how they didn't have any of that. So we had to be that for them.
And Jackie, a lot of those students made it through because you were
I
there. I
know, I
mean,
know.
and I even go one further. A lot of those students, I'm going to include myself, we are still connected because you were there.
I know. So let's talk about, I mean, it really does give me a lot of joy. Um, and I was having this conversation with somebody not too long ago. We would get the students' grades before they got the grades.
Mm.
And I would go through all of those grades. And if I saw someone who wasn't doing well, I put the word out, like a hit out on them, tell so-and-so I'm looking for them. And if they didn't come to find me, Dean and I, and Dean Patterson was my road dog, we would go to their classes. We would wait at the door and say, didn't I tell you to come and see me? Loved it. Now, I don't know how comfortable the students were, but the reason that we did that was because you worked too hard to get there. And we're not going to let you give up on yourself. You worked too hard to get here. And you had to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And I could speak to that because it took me 8 years to get my undergraduate degree. So I knew what it was like to sit down and want to stay down and say, no, but you have to get up. You've worked too hard. You've come too far. God has allowed you to be here. You have to finish. And
Mhm.
so that job was such a joy for me. When you all walked across the stage, you would have thought I was a person who would graduate. I was walking with you. And whenever I see any of those students, they're my kids. I just saw a student not too long ago, and he came to me and he said, oh my God, oh my God. And I felt the same way, who is now the CEO of a nonprofit himself, you know? And while they give us credit, and I thank you for the acknowledgement, but it was love. It was out of love. That was not a job. They couldn't have paid me enough to do that job
Mhm.
because I knew I was there for a reason. Let's go to purpose. I knew because of all the experiences that I had that that was the value that I brought to this. It took me forever to get through case, but I did. And so to be able to pull the veil off of that for someone else, to me, was the reason that I was there in that position in that moment in time.
That's so good. It's pretty much, I, I, I asked you if it was okay if I titled this conversation "Purpose is Picky, but it's worth it." And what you just said is you were handpicked to lead us through an institution, in my mind at the time, that if you weren't there, we would not have had the support that we would have needed in order to make it through. So
Yeah,
purpose is picky. It was not an accident
it wasn't an accident.
that you and Dean Patterson and Margaret Bowden, that all of y'all were there acting as an agency, a
That's
real
right.
force within an institution as minority students coming through this institution, just to have some, because I remember walking into your rooms and sitting, just flopping down on a chair, like just sitting there to talk. And you would always, you would always stop what you were doing. Like, what's up, Marnita?
Yeah, but I knew how important it was to be heard. I didn't have that in undergrad. There really wasn't, once that program I told you, when I was admitted, it was something called as a TRIO program called Student Support Services. After 1 year, they were gone. They lost the grant, case lost the grant. They didn't try to get it back as far as I know. And so I was floundering for that, however long that took. And so I understood the importance of having someone to talk to and somebody who'll listen, because that's the other thing that we don't always do. We allow people to talk, but we're not listening. And I thought it was important to help students understand more than anything else. Number one, you got here because you deserve to be here. It
Mhm.
wasn't a fluke. They didn't just open the door and say, oh, all the Black students come in. I literally had a student say that to me once. I was recruiting at my old high school, and a person raised their hand and said, don't you think affirmative action is unfair? And I was sitting there, and this is a Black student. I'm sitting there going, I felt like I was in an alternate universe. And I said, sweetheart, let me explain something to you. They do not take all of the Black students and put them in a corner and they say, we're going to teach you separately. You have to compete like everybody else. I said, all affirmative action ever did was to level the playing field so you could have access. That's it. That's it. So number one, it was to tell the students, you deserve to be here. Don't let anybody tell you differently. Number
Right.
two, there's a game, if you want to call it a game, there's a way you need to do this. There's a way you need to think about this process. And if I can explain that to you and help you understand it, once you understood the process, for the most part, we didn't have to do anything else. Once we helped you get over the hump, and the hump was usually, can I do it? Right? Do I belong here? Because
Mhm.
you had too many other voices telling you, oh,
That you
you're not
didn't.
as good as. And the only reason you're here is because you're Black and affirmative action. And you have to remember this was in the 70s, early 70s, early 80s, rather, late 70s, early 80s, yeah,
Absolutely.
and the 90s. And I can imagine that's still being done now or being said now, which is unfortunate. But it was really helping the students understand their worth. You deserve to be here. Now let's
Mhm.
show you how to do this, how to get it done.
Yeah.
Dean, coming full circle, Dean Patterson. Dean was my peer counselor when I was a freshman in Case. So when
Wow.
I went back, yeah, when I went to Case and found that Dean was there, that was a full circle moment for me. You know, he was part of student support services. He helped me get through. Then he disappeared because our program was gone. So I would say for us, I agree totally with and I live my life like this. In the Bible, it talks about Esther, and
Mhm.
Esther was a young woman who had found herself in the king's,
Alice.
yeah, thank you, in the king's palace, and she was one of his wives. And
Mhm.
this guy who I think his name was Sanballat, he did not like the Jews, and so he had convinced Esther's husband, the king, to allow the Jews to be attacked on a particular day. Esther's uncle, Mordecai,
45.
got
Mhm.
in touch with her and said, this is what the guy's doing, right? And he said, I need you to go and talk to the king. Esther sent out a message and said, you know, if he doesn't ask me to come in, if he doesn't invite me in, I mean, I could get killed. And then Mordecai says, how do
Mhm.
you know but you're there for such a time as this? And so I live my life on the how do you know, but you're not there for such a time as this? So going back to a comment that you made, I knew when I was at Case at that time, I was there for such a time as this. I didn't
That's
know
so
who I
good.
was going to help, but I knew because of what God had brought me through, I knew that information was important. He has given me, he told me that I had to treat it like Hansel and Gretel. And Hansel and Gretel, if you remember the story, they left breadcrumbs. So for most of my career, I've paid very close attention to all of the experiences that I had, the roads that I've taken, the mistakes or missteps that I've made, because I know God is going to send me somebody who's going to need to know what I learned in that process. So that's one of the reasons I think, Marnita, you and I are having this conversation now. You found me on LinkedIn,
I did.
and I had no idea that you were doing a podcast, but I do believe for such a time as this, that it's now time for
Now
us
it's
to have a
time.
conversation.
Speaking of your journey, you have given first,
Yes.
quotes first,
Yes.
a whole new meaning. The basic definition of first being coming before all others in time and order.
Yeah.
But you have defined first on a whole nother level. I have this question for you because you've been first in many of the roles and organizations that you have gone into. You have opened the door. You have created the order. Question,
Mhm.
what is required to be first?
So let's start with the willingness to be first,
Mm.
because you have to be willing to do that, right? I didn't know that that was going to be my journey. I really didn't. All I knew is that, things kept happening. The one example that I keep using, which really was like a wake-up call for me, I would go to meetings, and there was one meeting in particular, I had to go to the bathroom before the meeting was over. I came back from the bathroom and they had voted me as the chair of a subcommittee. And I was like, wait, I didn't even ask. I wasn't trying to be, right? It wasn't like I put my hand up and said, while I'm in the bathroom, if you all have a vote, go ahead. None of that happened. But those kinds of experiences kept happening. Other people saw in me what I didn't see in myself. And there was a colleague he and I were having the same experience. And we finally just talked one day and said, there must be something to this. God must be trying to get our attention. So what if we agree with him? What if we agree that for whatever reason, we have a skill set and he wants us to use it. And instead of us saying, I'm really good in a secondary position, because I kept saying that I'm really good in secondary. I'm a really good helper, really, really good helper. Never wanted the spotlight, ever, ever, never. Right.
And
And
that's why
I'm
you were
comfortable with
given
it
it.
now.
Yeah.
So for me, it was God had given me the ability to do it. I had to agree to use it in the way that God had given it to. And
Mhm.
so once I agreed with God, then I embraced okay, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. The second part of that, I was going through, I can't remember what was happening at the time, but I remember just praying and asking God, what this was about and what did he want me to do about it? And I literally heard in my spirit, I've given you skills and talents. He said they're part of your armamentarium. I knew it was God because that's not a word I use. It's not in my vocabulary.
That's a good word. Can you say that word one more time for us?
It's part of your armamentarium. And your
I like that.
armamentarium, the tools that you use, you know, and he talked to me about David and Goliath. And David had the ability to use a slingshot, and he knew that. But at the time, there was a guy named Saul who was the king and wanted him to use his armor to fight Goliath. And so they put the armor on David, and David said, I can't use these, right? I've never tried, it doesn't work for me. That's your armor, not mine. But he knew how to use a slingshot, and God had given him the ability to do it. And so he comes up to Goliath, swings his little slingshot, picks out the perfect rocks and sling it in Goliath's eyes. But he says before he does it, how dare you, you uncircumcised Philistine, and I'm paraphrasing, come to the army of the Most High God and think you're going to run over it. I am here on behalf of the God that I serve. So
Mhm.
that was my attitude, was once I understood that God had given me gifts and talents, part of my armamentarium. And he said, and I can't use them optimally through you if you don't own them.
Mm.
So I
That
remember
is so
saying,
good.
I said, so I did like this. I said, Father, and I'm looking up on purpose. I said, so Father, are you telling me that it's okay for me to tell people what I'm good at? And he said, absolutely. He said, because it has nothing to do with you. I gave it to you. I was like, oh. So that was the moment that I embraced being first. I am a change agent. That was the moment that I accepted the title of change agent. I'm, and this is what I've said to people this in the interview for the position I currently hold. I told them, I'm a change agent. If you don't want it to change, don't waste your time and don't waste mine.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
good.
Because it's going to change. It must, because that's what I do. That's my skill set. And so once I understood that part of it, I walk into an environment because God sends me there. I don't go anywhere unless God sends me the position, every position I've had, especially over the last 30 years, once I've really committed myself to following God's leading. Every position I've had is because God sent me. When you talk about purpose, and I knew that I was supposed to be there. I knew it. It was never a question. My prayer had started becoming, Father, open the door so wide that I can't help but know that's where you want me to walk. And
Mm.
close the door, lock the door, change the lock. So
Yes,
I'm trying to get into a door you don't want me to walk through.
yes,
Been
yes,
been
yes.
very faithful with that. So there were times, Marnita, when I thought that something was definitely going to happen. And then all of a sudden, last minute, that door slammed so quick in my face, and I would like rub my nose and said, "Okay, guys, so you don't want me to go there." And so I would just wait. I would wait. Sometimes I would walk slowly, and I would say to God, "I'm going to walk slow. I'm going to go in this direction. If that's not where you want me to go, I'm going to walk
Like it.
slow enough that I want to hear you, and then you'll redirect me." And that's the way I've chosen to live my life. So, in answer to your question about being first, that was never my intention. My intention became doing what God wanted me to do with the skill set that He's given me to do it and to agree with Him, to
Mm.
accept that, to want for my life, want for me what He wanted
He
for me.
wants you.
I'm
That's
prepared.
good.
I'm
Because
prepared.
we all have a unique ability that was given to us by God. And oftentimes I find that earlier on, especially if you don't know who he is,
Mhm.
we run from it
Yep.
because we believe our own narrative and don't believe in the narrative that he has for us. And once we surrender to what he has for us, life gets so much easier.
It does. Well, I'm going to say it differently. I'm going to say it gets easier and it gets harder.
And it gets harder too. Yeah,
Yeah, it gets
agreed.
easier in terms of once you accept that there is whatever you call God, once you accept that there's something bigger than you,
Mm,
and you recognize that that something bigger than you has a plan, and you trust the plan, even when it doesn't make sense. At one point I worked at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That never made sense to me, but I knew I was sent. I knew
mm,
I was sent, but it
mhm.
never made sense to me. But I trusted God enough that if that's where you want me to go, that's where I'll go. It wasn't until years later when I was working in this position that I then understood why I had to go to Rock Hall. But that was years later. All I knew,
Mm.
God sent me. I went the whole time, almost 7 years going, why am I here? And then after I left 2 years later, then I go, oh,
Oh.
that's why I had to go. So that's what I'm saying.
That is so good. So you don't try to understand it moving forward. You can only understand it most times you can only understand it looking back on how it all connected.
Yep. Yep.
Oh,
And
so good.
expect that. So this is the my expectation with God. I fully expect that if I do what God wants me to do, and I'm not saying I'm perfect with that because I'm not, but if I really have a heart purpose to do what He wants me to do, eventually He's going to let me know what it was about.
Mhm,
I just have to trust that eventually, it may not be now, but
mhm,
eventually He'll let me know what that was about. So, going in case I didn't plan to do that. That woman called me and told me about a position. I wasn't looking for a case.
mhm.
I wasn't looking for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame when I left there. God opened that door. And then when my husband and I went to Atlanta, God told us to go there. Things didn't work out the way I expected. And let's talk about expectation for a minute.
Yes, because that is so powerful.
There's an expectation we have, and then there's an expectation that God has.
Yes.
And usually I have been the most disappointed when things didn't live up to my expectation. And matter of fact, God and I stopped talking for about 4 years because I was so angry with something that didn't work out the way I was certain that it would. Um, but I always kept saying, God, I know who you are, and I don't have to wonder who you are and whether or not you're real. And if you don't mind, let me tell your listeners why that I
Of
was
course,
comfortable.
please.
Okay.
We need that girl. Yes.
So I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior when I was 12. It wasn't until I was 30 something that I was real clear about who God was. One was a belief. So I was married, or I am married. We're going on our 41st year together, 39 years married.
Yes.
Second marriage, so there's life after the first one. Um, but everything was going to hell in a handbasket. He and I were having problems. Our children were doing crazy stuff. The job was, I mean, every time I turned around, something strange was happening. And I finally said to God, I was in my bedroom and I looked up and I put my finger up and I said, look, I believe that you're God, but I don't know. I said,
Mm,
I've heard about you. Other people have talked to me about you, but I don't know. I said,
mm,
but this is what I'm going to do. I said, I'm going to read my Bible and I'm going to pray. And if you don't prove yourself to be God to me, I'm through. I didn't even say through. I said, I'm through. I said, but I'm going to do my part. I'm going to read. I'm going to, read my Bible and pray. And if you don't prove yourself to be God to me, I will know that you are a figment of my imagination.
mm.
Just like that. And then it
I
ain't
like
gonna
what
happen.
you said, but
Amen.
I'm gonna do my part. I
I'll
think
do
our
my,
listeners need to hear that part
yeah.
because you have to do your part
You
in order
have
for
to.
him to do his part. Because
Yeah.
he ain't gonna do your part.
Nope. And he won't do your part. Now, he may make it uncomfortable if you don't do your part.
Yeah,
Okay.
the
He'll light a
burning
fire under
like,
you.
what is going on?
He'll light a fire under you and keep having people bother you enough about it. And that's only because you told him that you would serve. Right? You said your heart is purpose to serve, and God said, I heard you when you said that. And because you said that and you were sincere when you said it, I'm gonna hold you accountable for that. I was like, okay. So I did my part. I read my Bible. I started praying. And it got to the point, Marnita, where I remember one day I was reading my Bible and it seemed like words started jumping off the page. I mean, to the point where I'm looking around, go, did anybody else see that but me? I was going nuts. Then I started hearing the voice of the Lord. And I knew it was God because it wasn't me. I knew it, right? And I grew up, I was Baptist first, then became Pentecostal Church of God in Christ. Now, Church of God in Christ is they believe in Holy Spirit, jumping and shouting, falling out and everything. All right. I hadn't done any of that. But there was a woman every Sunday that at 11 o'clock you could set your watch to her, that she started jumping up and down, right? And so I thought that was the Holy Ghost. So there was one day I went to I was getting up and putting on my clothes. This was after I'd had that conversation with God. And I started hearing about the Holy Spirit and his manifestation. So Jesus breathed on his disciples, but 40 days later, the Holy Spirit manifests himself. Well, I'd heard this before preached, but it never resonated with me. But that moment it did. I get to work. For whatever reason, I couldn't focus. And I heard in my spirit, why don't you just praise me? So I was like, oh, okay. Thank you for my husband and my children, my this and that, and just running down the list. All of a
Mm,
sudden, and fortunately, I closed the door in my office. All of a sudden, my chest expanded and these words started coming out of my mouth that sounded Arabic to me. And so all of a sudden I held my head and go, oh my God, it's real.
fucking, yeah, you just spoke in tongue. Yeah.
And I went on the
It's his
floor.
language, right?
That was right. That's right. So I go on the floor. I'm in tears. It's still in the back of my head. My mouth is still moving. And I'm going, okay, so it's real. Do I stop it? Does it stop itself? I mean, I'm just sitting there confused. Thank God I closed my door because people walking in would have thought I was crazy. So I get off the floor. A friend of mine had been talking to me about the Holy Spirit. I call her at work. She was a secretary of case. I called her and said, guess what happened? So I told her what happened. She started speaking in tongue at her desk. I'm speaking in tongue in my office. And that was the beginning. And it
Mm,
was in that experience. Nobody can tell me God's not real. I
mm,
don't, there's nothing you can say to me because I know. So I needed to tell you that part of the story in order for you to understand the rest of it. So for me, it's not an intellectual conversation about spirituality.
mhm.
It's a lived experience conversation.
Experiential. Yes.
That's right. And about believing that God knows who I am. And I tell people this all the time. You know, when you go to like a mall and you're trying to find a store and there's a little sticker that says you are here. God knows exactly where you are. You are here, and He knows that. And so
Mhm.
I try to remind people of that. He knows. He knows where you are. He knows what you're experiencing. He knows how you feel. I don't lie to God. Whatever I feel, I tell him because he already knows.
He
you know,
already knows,
he
right?
already knows. So I have a real relationship. And out of that
That's
relationship,
important. That's
very
important.
much
You know,
so.
I think it's really important when you can really experientially see things unfold, like in the midst of it unfolding according to his word. Like if you are immersed in the word, you could be going about your day and things will unfold based on something that you have understood and internalized and believe based on what he said. And it happens to you. And I look up, I'm like, God, really?
Yep. Really? So I
Like,
did
really?
something simple. I was at work and this was another one of those teachable moments for me. Um, I lost the back of my earring. And it was a quick prayer. I said, Father, I know this is so small. It really is. I said, but if you could find me a back of my earring. Now I lost it before I got to work. I looked down and there was a back of an earring that I could use on my earring. And what he taught me was even in little things, you can trust me. I was
Yeah,
like,
that's so good. That's so
so
good.
it makes it easier for me to be honest with you when we talk about purpose. I
Oh,
will,
absolutely. You know, that's why I created this platform, I call it a movement, build $1 million legacy with purpose, because we all have one.
mhm,
Whether or not most people are in alignment with what that is, and I often hear people, I'm searching for, I'm looking for my purpose, and I get what they mean when they say that, but they're looking for maybe in the wrong place because purpose was in you when before you even got here. So I try to encourage people to get in a quiet space and to reconnect
mhm,
with the one who gave you the purpose in the first
first,
way, and he will make it crystal clear to you what that is. How you going to get there? You don't need to figure that out.
yeah,
You just need to step into it and own it and believe it and, accept it, yield to whatever it is he wants and not specifically what you want.
what
And
you
don't
want.
put a timeline on, like, I need to have it by in the next 2 years. He may not want you to have it in the next year because you have to become the person.
Mhm,
And he protects you in that journey.
yeah,
And I, bio, I read like in your book, it talks about lessons, leadership lessons, notes from and for the journey. And in leadership is big. And
yeah.
everything that you have done exudes leadership. So what I would like to know and what I would like our listeners to hear, what is your philosophy of about leadership? What is your philosophy?
To me, leadership is stewardship. It's a privilege to be a leader. And not everybody can be in terms of the way I define it. If you're running the leadership so that you can get the title and the money, please don't. Please
Mhm.
don't do it for that reason. Because it's a major responsibility. You know, you mentioned in the introduction, our organization is 47 million in terms of revenue. I'm responsible for that. I'm responsible for 320 people and their livelihood. I'm responsible. And I realize the responsibility. It's a major, it's a privilege to do it, but it's also a responsibility. And you can't take that lightly. If I'd spend so much time walking around going, I'm the CEO, and I've met people like that, by the way. I'm the CEO, I'm the CEO. Well, I that wasn't my expectation. I didn't run to become a CEO, to be honest with you. I was working at an organization and I have a personal mission statement. Um, and it's what is it called? I normally tell people, I ask people this question when we start a relationship. Open, honest, direct communication. Are you comfortable with that? Always ask that question. Everybody says yes until such time as I'm open, honest, and direct. So I'm sitting here and the person that I reported to kept accusing me of something I didn't do. And I'm grown enough to say if I did it, I'd tell you I did it. I'd own it. Okay. And I would like other people to do the same. If you make a mistake, own it. You know, figure out what you learn from it and try to, fix it if you can. And if you can't, it's a teachable moment. Anyway, so after the third, no, fourth, blaming me for something I didn't do, I did like this. I said, well, damn it, if I'm going to get blamed for it, I may as well be in charge of it. It was in that moment I decided I want to be a CEO. Prior to that, I was comfortable, like I said, I'm comfortable in the number two position. I just never want to be the weak link on any chain. If I'm connected to you, I'm going to pull my part. I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do. I ask that you do the same. Right? So in that moment, after getting blamed and saying, well, damn it, I may as well be in charge. That's when I opened the door to, okay, Father, if that's what you want for me, I now want it for myself. Before, even if God had talked to me about it, I would have said, nope, 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 not what I want to do, not who I am. So I didn't run to that. It was more, I think, just having the experience and God saying, are you now ready?
Mm.
And I said, okay. And then it still took a while. And let me backtrack a little bit. There was a person, God told me to get in touch with three people before I made it to the Rock Hall. One of the three people was the president of Emory University at the time. I don't know if you remember Jim Wagner. Jim was the dean of engineering either shortly after
I
you.
do remember the name, yes.
Okay. So he had become the president of Emory University, and Jim is a Christian. And I called him because God told me to call him. And so at the end of our conversation, he says, Jack, I think you should consider becoming the president of the CEO. And I was like, it wasn't on my radar of the top 100 things to be. That wasn't even on my list.
Mm.
But I said, Jim, if that's the word that God has for me, then that's what I want. Okay. And I'm okay with it. That would have been in 2004. I didn't become CEO until 2015. We're talking 11 years later of a person speaking it and then me accepting it.
Mm. That is so good.
Yeah. And
That
I,
is so good. I hope y'all taking notes because she is dropping some purpose gems today on so many different levels, and hopefully you'll go back and watch this conversation again because so we're almost done, but we're not there yet. I think it has so much value. Has so much value. So thank you for sharing and being so vulnerable with us today. Over the next decade, speaking of leadership, and this answer may be the same, I don't know, but you tell me. Over the next decade, what will be essential for leaders in the marketplace, whether it be profit or nonprofit, in order to have leadership at its excellence?
um, so I will say the same two things. Leadership is stewardship and it's a privilege. And as long as you keep that in the forefront, that's the most important thing. You need to understand that it's all on you. Like I have 18 bosses, and that's my board. That board, I'm the only employee of that board. Everybody else, all 320 other people report to me. Okay.
Mhm.
And so I'm aware of that part of it. So when I walk in the room, I represent 320 people in this organization. I never forget that. And I
Mhm.
think sometimes leaders have a tendency to believe the spotlight is always on them. I don't, I'm in the spotlight because I need to be in the spotlight, not because I seek the spotlight. I need to be there because I'm the CEO of this organization. And I'll share with you something that, well, remember I mentioned God told me to get in touch with three people. Jim Wagner was one. The other person was the president of a community college. And I asked her, she's the CEO of this massive, organization. And I said, what are the top three things you've learned as a CEO? And she said, number one, people are always watching. Number two, people are always watching. And number
Mhm.
three, people are always watching. And that wasn't what I expected her to say at all. She said, so I have to be careful where I go, what I'm seen doing. She said, I never leave the house in rollers. Like, and I don't. So when I leave the house, if not dressed to the nines, I'm dressed. So that if anybody were to see me, they would say, oh, I saw Dr. Chisholm. Okay. Because everybody has a cell phone. Everybody can take a picture. You know,
Yes.
if I walk into the wrong building, she said, if I go to a certain kind of movie and somebody sees me, they go, look where I saw so and so. So I took that to heart. For leaders, you have to understand people are always watching. And I'm not even talking about making a mistake. I'm talking about how do you present yourself as a leader? I'm a role model to 320 people. So
Mhm.
if I treat them badly, then I've just role modeled for them how they can treat each other. I can't do that. I'm responsible. Okay. Um, as long as you understand that the minute you become a leader, you don't have a personal opinion anymore. When you represent an organization, that's why you don't see me on Facebook. You don't see me on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
I have
I get
a
it.
personal opinion
Mhm.
because people will assume that I'm speaking for the agency when I open my mouth. I can't parse it. I can't say, well, I'm just speaking as an independent. I can't.
Can't separate the two.
You can't because other people won't. So as a leader, you just have to understand if you decide that this is what number one, to be called to it. I think you should do it if you're called to do it. You should
Mhm.
you should accept the call and say, okay. Number two, if this is something that you feel that you really want to do, just understand what it means.
Mhm.
Understand, read the books that you need to read. And even when you read all the books, there's something to be said for
There's
you.
always
Just have
more.
to you have to be in it, right? Because there are a lot of things that nobody told me about being a leader. But I think the most important thing is understand why you're doing it. Again, if it is for the title, please don't do it for that. If it is for the money, please don't do it for that.
Mhm.
I knew when I took the title, is it nice being CEO? Yes. Yes, yes. And why? Because I could affect change in a way that I couldn't before. When Dr. Chisholm says, I want something done, I expect it to get done. Whereas if I'm a vice president, I don't have that kind of authority unless it's the people who report directly to me. Okay. But as CEO, everybody reports to me. So I can affect change in a way I couldn't before. But I think more importantly, it's it's because I care. Please don't take a job if you don't care about the mission of that organization. If it really only is a notch on your belt or a resume builder, the organization deserves better than that.
Yes.
Okay. And
Agreed.
especially if you're a nonprofit. For profit is a whole different thing. You've got shareholders and all that other stuff and revenue generation. But a nonprofit, the lifeblood of a nonprofit is the mission. If
Mhm.
you can't agree with that mission, if you can't support that mission, don't take that job.
Yeah. That's
I I'm clear about my mission. We grew up, step forward. Like I mentioned, we work with low income families. At one point in time, when my parents divorced, my father took his money with him. He did not even pay child support. My mother had three children. We had government cheese, government bread, and we had government butter, and they came in blocks like this. I remember not having meat and eating mayonnaise sandwiches. So when I accepted that position, I accepted the position because I understood the mission of this organization, passionate about the mission of this organization.
that's good. That's so good. I remember those lots of cheese
Yeah,
that wouldn't melt in the oven.
yeah, it wouldn't even melt.
I remember. So you've had an amazing journey, but as in all journeys, it costs you something.
Oh, absolutely.
What is the cost associated with becoming and sustaining a premier leadership status?
The very thing that you're really good at is the very thing that can trip you up. For example, I consider myself fairly intuitive. Now, the problem with being intuitive is that you feel other people's pain. So I can speak to somebody and go, you know what it feels to me like, or it seems to me like, but because I can feel their pain, I hold on to it like that. And that's been difficult for me. Um, Number two, I have a standard that I've set that's usually higher than anybody else has set for me. So if this is what an A is, I've always said this to people, if an A is possible, I want an A plus. I'm very competitive as far as that's concerned. The upside is the standard that I set, because it's higher than most, I'm usually going to exceed your expectation. The
Mhm.
downside to that is because I put myself, I give myself sometimes not unattainable, but difficult to attain standard. So I run myself ragged when it's not necessary. I had a psychologist say to me one time, he said, Jackie, you know, a C is still passing. And I was like, I know, but
I don't just want to be passing. I'm allergic to average.
yeah, it's just not something that I mean, now if I've done everything I can do and a C is the best I can get, okay, I can live with that. But I don't run after a C. I don't. I still don't, right? So for me, that's the challenge of just being me. The other sacrifice is that you've got to be careful about, like in my household, like I said, my husband and I have been together 41 years. The woman that I was at work cannot be the woman that I am at home. Can't do it. Because when I'm at work, I'm telling all these people what to do. When I'm at home, he's my partner. And it was confusing our children when they were little. And I got to the point, God had to correct me. He said, "You're his helpmeet." And I was like, but well, God, I go to work every day. So does, like he does. Why would I?
Mhm.
And he said, "You're his helpmeet." And I was like, okay. So I woke up, I heard it 3 times. Help me. Third time I said, help me. Got up that morning. Our youngest was, no, oldest was 8 at the time. She had a question for me. She wanted to do something. And so now I'm trying to put this in practice. So I said, what does your father say? Because before she would come to me, I'd say yes, he'd go to him, he'd say no, right? And then she would do it because I say it. So I said, what did your father say? She said, he said no. I said, okay, then it's no. And she said, and this is a quote, you can't think for yourself anymore?
Mhm.
8. And it's with just the night before when God said, help me. And I put my head down, prayed, and I looked up and I said, I can still think for myself. However, I'll talk to your father. If the father says it's no, it's still no. And that was, and like I said, she'll be 38 this year. So 30 years ago, I had to get that straightened out. What the person I am at work can't be the person I am at home, 2 different women. Now, I'm consistent in who I am. I'm consistent in who I am. I know what matters to me. I know what I believe. And like I told you, the open, honest, direct communication, that wherever I am with whomever I am, that is always consistent. But I can't walk home. I can't come home and direct him to do something. He
Yeah.
doesn't report to me. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's another one. I have gained probably 70 pounds in being in a leadership role. I now wear a bite guard to sleep because I was grinding my teeth.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's the other things that people don't understand. I need to do a better job of taking care of myself. I've allowed the climb and the responsibility to take a physical toll. I would highly recommend people not do that, that you be more mindful of your health than I've been. I've sacrificed a lot to do it.
Mhm.
And now I'll be 65 next month. You and I talked about that. I'll be 65 and I have some physical ailments based on being 65, but also I'm overweight.
Mhm.
I've allowed stress to be a major factor in my life. And so I need to do a better job. So those are some of the sacrifices. And then you got to figure out what your work-life balance is.
Yeah.
You cannot spend 24 hours a day at work. You can't. You cannot, if you take time, and this is what my mother died when she was 53. I was 20, 23, 24 when she passed. And I just had our oldest child 2 weeks before. So she died unexpectedly. But she said to me before she passed a few years before, they will never owe me vacation. Never.
Mhm.
And I not only do I preach it, I live that. They will never owe me vacations. I'm not trying to save up all my vacation. I
That's
believe
good.
when there's mental health issue. Today I'm working remotely. Why? Because I didn't feel like going into work. I needed a day because I didn't feel well. Okay. So I've given myself permission to take the time that I need to take. And if I take vacation, like I put it in the system that it's a vacation day or sick day, don't call me.
Don't call
It's my
me.
time, right? I don't check my emails. I tell my staff, my leadership team, I have 5 vice presidents. I tell each one of them, look them in the face, love you, love you, love you. But when I'm going to act like I don't know you.
I
Handle
love it.
handle it. Because if you don't, and I made this
You have
mistake,
to have a hard line. You have to have a hard line,
otherwise you won't have a life.
or you won't have a life.
You won't have a life.
So, in doing all that you have done, it requires that some principles be in place because you cannot have accomplished all that you have without abiding to principles, which are laws for your life, right? And they're indiscriminate,
Hmm.
right? So if I aspire to get to where you are, first thing I'm gonna ask you, what are your principles? Because if they work for you, they'll work for me.
Mhm. Uh,
So what is your cornerstone principles that you have lived by in your growth and your development?
first again, open, honest, direct communication. That's what I'm known for. That's what I choose to do, and it is a choice. Um, what you see is what you get, and it's taken me years to get to that point because of the way I was raised, um, abandonment issues, rejection, all that's still in there. Okay, so for me, it's walking my talk. If I were to define it, it's to be consistent in your communication and consistent in your behavior.
I love
Those
that.
are my principles. And whenever given an opportunity to go down a slippery slope, if it's something I've never done before, it's called setting a precedent. Is that the kind of precedent I want to set for myself? And if the answer is no, then I don't do it. Okay. And the same thing is true in the organization. Whenever there's a decision, is this something that can I, what's the optics of it? You may be able to do something and it's not a problem, it's not unethical, it's not illegal, but it doesn't look good. So then you have to step back and go, is that something that you want to have your name associated with? You know, that old expression about if it were to show up in the newspaper, you know, or can you look yourself in the face in the mirror and say it's okay? So I've made a conscious decision over the years, and some of it, to be honest with you, Dr. Marnita, you have to find it. You have to, you'll get to a point where you can either cross the line, and once you get there and it's uncomfortable, and this is where a lot of people get in trouble, they'll give themselves permission to cross that line that they knew they should not have crossed.
Hmm.
But once you cross it, it becomes easier to cross others.
Oh my goodness, that is so good. That
Yeah.
because it's so true.
Once you give yourself permission to do it once, you'll give yourself permission to, and you'll make excuses for it. Okay.
Yes.
I try never to do that. The position that I currently hold, my predecessor went to prison 4 months before I got there. And shortly after I got there, this guy kept trying to call and talk to me and everything. And all I kept telling, and I say this to everybody. If I won't go to prison for my children and my husband, I'm certainly not going to go to prison for you.
Mm.
And so for me, if it looks, if it the passing the smell test or the duck test, if it sounds like a duck, waddles like a duck, it's a duck.
Isn't that
It's a duck. You don't have to think about a version
right?
of a duck. It's a duck. Okay. And so if it gets to the point where something doesn't feel right, don't ignore that. All of us have intuition, all of us, whether we
All of
listen
us.
to it or
Yeah.
not. But
Yeah.
if it doesn't feel right, and it may not feel right for you. Maybe somebody else is okay, but if it doesn't feel right for you, listen to that.
Mhm.
There's a reason for that. And so I've learned over the years to pay attention to how that feels, not just my head, but my heart. So I lead with my heart, going back to a comment that you made about leaders. To me, a good leader also leads with their heart. Not that you have it on full display, because people take pot shots at it.
Oh
Okay.
yeah.
But be aware that it's there. So if it doesn't feel right, try not to do that. Don't give yourself permission to cross a line that you know you shouldn't cross. Um, be clear about what is it, what do you stand for? You know, because they said if you don't know what you stand for, you'll fall for anything. What do you stand for? You know, and then going back to the comment you made about the purpose, there are a lot of people who are looking for this and having people tell them what their purpose is. And I stopped doing that. I asked the question, what is my passion?
Mm,
Love. I love going back to what we first started talking about. I loved working with you all. That was a job that they could have paid me to do or not paid me to do. Loved doing it because I could see the impact. I could see myself in each one of you. I was pulling for you. Loved, loved, loved that job. And it was out of those kinds of experiences that I understood part of my purpose was to encourage people, to enable people, to empower people, to help them dream bigger than where they are. That's what I get up every day wanting to do, to encourage somebody. You should feel good when you're around me. Now, if I'm getting your behind because you did something you weren't supposed to do, that's a whole different issue.
right.
But I look for the good. I
Mm,
say good, I speak good into people because too often people don't. And I
yes.
was one of those people, one of those people who
It's
said something.
particularly ourselves. Like we don't speak good to ourselves. And so we need an agent, a change agent to speak good to us until we begin to believe it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because what I see that you do, you help people see
Yeah.
them that they don't know.
And I'm glad you said that because, and I'm going to bring Maya Angelou here once. I had an opportunity to meet her when I was in California on behalf of Case. And she was standing in the lobby of a hotel. And at first I was like, should I go over? I'm sure a lot of people go over and I go, you know what? How do you know the guy didn't send you here for this reason, right? So I went
Right.
over to her.
Hey, Esther, good. Yeah, say that word.
Yeah. And I said, Miss Angelou, I said, I'm not to bother you. I just want you to know that I'm a big fan of your work. And this one was real tall. I was surprised at how tall she was. And she put her hand out, she extended her hand to me, and I put my hand in hers, and then she covered my hand with her other hand. And she said, and my dear, what is your name? And I told her. And then she said, Mrs. Chisholm, thank you so much for stopping me and sharing that with me. And then she let my hand go, and I'm thinking, I'll never wash this hand again. And she walked, I mean, like glided away. And one of the things that she's quoted as saying, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you've done, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And so I took that in the course of our conversation, what I've shared with you, there's certain nuggets that I've taken and said, that's who I'm going to be. That's the leaders, the kind of leader I choose to be. I choose to let people know that I see you and you're important to me. Okay. I don't want anything from you. I don't need anything from you. I'm here to serve. Leadership is serve, being a servant.
And
It's
servant.
being a good steward. I'm here to help. Whatever role I'm in, I'm here to bring resources to the community, wherever it is. My job is to be that conduit for it. It's a choice that I've made. It's a skill that God has given me, and I'm walking in my purpose in doing it.
Yes, anyone's out there, you're looking at leadership positions, please rewatch this conversation because she has given so much information. But when you go back through it a second time, get your notepad out because I know like if you don't write it down, you're gonna forget it and you need to understand it and assimilate it because it's wisdom. You can then begin to apply it. So oh my God, you have given us so much wisdom, but I do have a few questions that I like to standardize the conversation with, if you don't mind.
So
So, question one, what is your favorite quote that inspires you when you feel you're not living at your highest level?
the one that comes to mind is that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Another one is to dream big because it takes the same energy to dream small. Those are the two.
Okay, that's good. What is one book that has made a difference as you are living out your purpose?
A dream giver. Dream Giver it's the same person who wrote um The Prayer of Jabez.
Okay,
I can't think of, hold on, because I've got the book like I'm in my office. So let me grab it.
okay.
All right, here's a book.
Okay. Okay. The Dream Giver. Okay.
Yep, Dream Giver, and it's by Bruce Wilkinson.
Okay.
This book was life-changing. And
Okay.
the premise of the book basically is there was a guy named Nobody, and God had put him on a journey to become somebody.
Mm.
And what he learned along the way changed my life.
Now, I've read a lot of books, but I haven't read that one yet. So I am getting that one today. I don't know about y'all, but I'm getting it today. Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
lastly, what tool do you use to continue to elevate and grow in what you have been purposed to do?
Cool. I spent a lot of time in reflection. I can't call it prayer necessarily. I just try to stay open. Father, what is it that you would have me do now? And that's it. I don't like the book that I wrote. I didn't write that. I was the conduit for the book, but God wrote the book.
Mm.
Because I kept saying, why would anybody care, Father? There are
Can you show
millions
us
of
that
books.
book one more time? I know you showed it at the beginning of the conversation.
It's called Leadership Lessons, Notes from and for the Journey.
Okay.
And so years, people kept saying, "Oh, Jackie, you should write a book. You should write a book." And I'm going, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah," but whatever. And then I was doing a presentation at a national conference, and at the end of it, when we were doing the Q&A, this woman raised her hand and said, "Where can I buy your book?" And I was like, "You know what?" I said, "Funny you should mention that. I'm working on a book." Okay, but it was in my head, and it
Okay.
wasn't until I can't remember, like a January, and I usually try to take 3 or 4 weeks off in December. That's my time. I save it up so that I'm out of the job for almost a month. So it was during that period of time, it was, okay, Father, I feel the pull, the push to do it, but what to call it? What am I going to write about? And I thought it was going to be something totally different. And literally woke up that morning, he gave me the title, and then he gave me everything that's in that book. God told me these are the lessons because I said, what would you have me tell your people? Okay.
Mm.
I start with what do you want me to do in this situation, God? What do you want me to do? How do you want me to be here? God has been very gracious. I'm currently at Harvard Business School in a program. And at the end of that program, I'm going to be a Harvard Business School alum. Always wanted to go to Harvard. Never thought I'd have this opportunity. Like I said, I'm going to be 65 and, I'm going to be a Harvard Business School alum. But I got there. I just came back, was there for 2 weeks. And I said, this is what I wasn't asking God to teach me any particular thing. I said, Lord, I want to learn what I need to learn,
Mhm.
share what I need to share, meet who I need to meet, and grow however you want me to grow. That was it. That was it. And so I try to keep myself open like that
Mhm.
to however God leads because I trust God
Mm. You have to
with my life.
trust them, don't you? Oh
You
my
have
goodness,
to.
you have to trust. Like the foundation. Like you cannot have a relationship with God without trust.
I don't know how people get through the world without a belief in a higher power. I just don't. I would have crumbled years ago. I could have died before parents, after parents got a divorce, boyfriend beating me, failed marriage, suicidal. I mean, just pick one. And
Hmm.
here we are having a conversation. I'm leading this organization, privileged to do so. Like I said, you found me on LinkedIn, and we found each other on LinkedIn. And now today we're having this conversation, and all we've talked about is the purpose behind the life that we currently live.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but for me, it's been just kind of resting in it. Too often we're running toward it. I'm
Mm.
resting in it. I'm just resting in it.
Mm.
Whatever God wants me to do, I'll do. I've told people in my office, I knew when I got there I was a change agent. Like I said, my predecessor went to prison 4 months before I got there. We've been doing a lot of rebuilding. But at any point in time, when God says that this assignment is over, and that's the way I look at stuff now. While I'm CEO,
Assignment.
it's an assignment. It's an assignment.
Y'all, I'm telling y'all, y'all need to listen to this. It's an assignment.
Assignment. That's it. And I can pack my office up in 2 hours.
Mm.
Assignment. too often people start thinking that, you get comfortable. The Who Moved My Cheese book is another good one. Who Moved My Cheese, where they start thinking that it was all about them and it was their cheese and this and that and the other. And go, no, no, no. Guy corrected me years ago. Even the PhD, he told me, he said, the PhD is a ministry tool. Don't make it more than that. So I couldn't even glory in getting that. He said, it's a minute. He said, where I'm sending you, you're going to need that. I said,
Mm,
okay, got it. I got it. I understand.
that's so good. That is so good. So how do we get your book?
So you can get the book on probably the best way to get it is through Dr. Jacqueline A. Chisholm.com. So DrJacklyn is in nice and middle initial A, and then Chisholm is CHISHOLM as in man.com.
Okay, I'm gonna put that link in the description area. So all they have to do is click
That's all.
go buy. So we'll do that. And with It's Worth It coaching and consulting, do you primarily work with organizations or individuals? What does that look like for you?
So really, it all depends. My preference would be to work with individuals, but individual aspiring leaders, because those are the
Okay, so can you list at least three attributes that one
aspiring
needs to
leaders.
have in order to reach out and contact me and say, look, Dr. Jacqueline Chisholm, I need your help. Like there has to be attributes that must be in place because don't waste my time and I won't waste your time, right?
So this is what I normally tell people. You have to know first and foremost what it is that you're missing. Okay,
Mm.
not every gap, but you need to know that there's a gap. If you want to be a really good leader, then there's certain information you don't have. And so for those people who know that and who aspire to it for the right reasons, those are people I'm looking for. I'm also, do presentations. I also do, speeches like keynote speeches. I haven't worked with a corporation yet, but I'm open to it. But I said before, Marnie, whatever God wants me to do, I'll do.
Okay, so if someone wants to bring you in for a speaking engagement, will they also reach out to the Dr. Jacqueline A. Chisholm.com?
So that one would be, I've got a Gmail address for that. And needless to say,
Okay, we'll put that one in the description also because more people need to hear your voice.
well, aren't you? I really appreciate it. Um, so it's worth it, LLC at gmail.com. So ITSWORTHIT LLC at gmail.com.
Okay, that's the email address. Okay, I'll put that in the description as well. Well, this conversation has been amazing. Awesome. Thank you so much for your insight, your experience, and your knowledge that you have so generously shared with us today. I can't, I'm getting the book. I'm getting both books. The Giver book?
Yeah, the Dream Giver.
The Dream Giver book, that one.
Gotta get
Life
it.
changes, transformational content in there that's going to help change your life. And until our next conversation, I am Dr. Marnita with P3 Purposepreneur. And P3 Purposepreneur, here we are pattern makers, and pattern makers are move makers. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience before we sign off?
I would just say thank you for the opportunity. And I'm glad to see that you're operating in your purpose.
Yes.
Because where you were and what you're doing now, you wouldn't have known that, what, 20, 30 years ago?
No, ma'am. I sure
And they
would
should
not
be.
have.
So just
Yes.
be open to your listeners. Be open to whatever God leads you to do. There's a reason for it. There's a purpose behind it. So thank you again for the opportunity. Love you.
Ah,